March 1943, 30,000 feet above occupied France. Here is a number that will haunt you. Between 1940 and 1942, the Royal Air Force lost over 3,000 aircraft to German fighters. 3,000 burning wrecks spiraling toward Earth. 3,000 crews who climbed into their bombers at dawn and never came home for dinner. The kill ratio was a nightmare. For every German fighter shot down 3 or 4 Allied bombers exploded in flames. British bomber crews had a saying. They called their aircraft flying coffins. They were not joking. But somewhere in a quiet English factory, a group of furniture makers and piano builders were about to change everything. They were not engineers. They were not military experts. They were craftsmen who worked with wood glue and sandpaper. The aircraft they built would be mocked as a desperate joke. German propaganda called it proof that Britain was scraping the bottom of the barrel. That wooden joke would go on to fly 39,795 combat missions. It would drop 26,867 tons of bombs on Nazi Germany. It would achieve a kill ratio exceeding 10-1 against the Luftwaffe's finest metal fighters. And German pilots who laughed at the furniture plane would learn to fear the sound of its twin Merlin engines screaming toward them at 400 miles per hour. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, the aircraft that should not have existed. The wooden wonder that rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. But first, let me tell you about a man named Oberleutnant Klaus Fischer, and the worst mistake he ever made. The air war over Europe in early 1943 was a slaughterhouse. Every morning, young men in leather jackets and wool uniforms climbed into their bombers, knowing the mathematics of death. A full combat tour meant 30 missions. The survival rate for completing 30 missions was less than 50%. Many crews never made it past their first 5. The problem was simple and brutal. Allied bombers were slow. Heavy armor to protect the crew meant weight. Defensive gun turrets bristling with machine guns meant more weight. Massive bomb loads meant even more weight. All that weight meant the bombers crawled through the sky at just 250 miles per hour. German Bf-109 fighters could cruise at 350 miles per hour or faster. They swooped down on the bomber formations like hawks attacking pigeons. The bomber gunners fired back desperately, but hitting a fast-moving fighter from a vibrating aircraft was nearly impossible. The German pilots picked off bomber after bomber, watching them fall trailing smoke and flame. The Wellington bomber, the Sterling, the Halifax. Good aircraft, brave crews, terrible survival rates. Young men wrote letters to their families before each mission. Many of those letters were delivered by telegram instead. The RAF desperately needed something new, something that could fly deep into enemy territory, photograph German positions, drop bombs on critical targets, and actually come home alive. Every military expert said it was impossible. You needed armor, you needed guns, you needed heavy construction. All of that meant slow, and slow meant dead. But one British company had an idea so crazy that the Air Ministry laughed them out of the room. 3 times. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. was not a military man. He was the son of an aircraft designer who had grown up around wood and fabric and the smell of engine oil. He understood flight in his bones, and he had been thinking about a problem that kept him awake at night. What if everything the military believed about bombers was wrong? The logic seemed bulletproof. Armor protects crews from bullets. Guns let crews fight back. Heavy construction survives damage. But de Havilland saw the flaw. All that protection did not matter if you were too slow to escape. German fighters would always catch you. German guns would always reach you. The armor might stop the first few bullets, but eventually something would get through. What if instead of trying to survive, hits you simply never got hit at all? What if you built a bomber so light and so fast that enemy fighters could not catch it? No armor, because the bullets would never reach you. No guns, because the enemy would always be behind you watching you disappear into the distance. Just pure, impossible, ridiculous speed. The aircraft de Havilland proposed was called the DH-98 Mosquito, and its construction method made military officials choke on their tea. He wanted to build it from wood, not metal, not aluminum, not steel, wood, birch plywood from Canadian forests, balsa wood from South America, resin glue from Ecuador, the same materials you would use to build a bookshelf or a piano. In 1938, when de Havilland first presented his idea, aircraft design had moved firmly into the metal age. Modern military planes were built from aluminum alloys, riveted together in vast factories. Wood belonged to the previous war. Wood was what the Wright brothers used. Wood was primitive, backward, insane. The Air Ministry rejected his proposal. Build a military bomber from furniture scraps. With no guns to defend itself, the man had clearly lost his mind. De Havilland came back. They rejected him again. He came back once more. By 1939, with war erupting across Europe and Britain growing desperate, they finally agreed to let him try. Not because they believed in his crazy wooden aircraft, because they had nothing left to lose. The construction technique de Havilland developed had never been tried before in military aviation. The fuselage was built like a sandwich. Thin sheets of birch plywood on the outside, lightweight balsa wood in the middle, more plywood on the inside, all glued together under pressure and heat in giant ovens until the layers fused into a single solid shell. The result was a structure that looked delicate but was incredibly strong. The curved wooden pieces were molded perfectly fitted together like a three-dimensional puzzle. No rivets, no seams. Just smooth, continuous wood that sliced through the air with almost no drag. 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines provided the power. These were the same engines that made the Spitfire fighter legendary. But the Mosquito had 2 of them, one on each wing, delivering a combined 3,000 horsepower to an airframe that weighed almost nothing. The first prototype flew on November 25, 1940. Test pilots climbed out of the cockpit grinning like children on Christmas morning. The aircraft handled like a sports car with wings. It was fast. Impossibly, beautifully, terrifyingly fast. When German intelligence officers received reports that Britain was building military aircraft in furniture factories, they laughed, not polite chuckles. Real, genuine, belly-shaking laughter. Photographs showed British workshops that looked like carpentry shops rather than aircraft factories. Woodworkers in aprons were using saws and sanders to shape the pieces. Piano makers and cabinet builders were constructing what was supposed to be a military bomber. German propaganda radio broadcasts picked up the story immediately. Announcers mocked the plywood plane as proof that Britain was finished. So desperate for aircraft that they were building them from scraps like children making toys in a garage. One broadcaster said the Mosquito looked like something a boat builder might throw together on a weekend. Luftwaffe pilots received intelligence briefings that filled them with confidence. The Mosquito was made of wood, the officers told them. Plywood and balsa. A few cannon rounds would shatter the wooden frame like dropping a chair off a roof. These planes would be easy kills. Free victories to add to their tallies. Nobody in Germany was worried about the wooden toy. They should have been. The first operational Mosquito squadrons formed in mid-1941. Pilots and navigators arrived for training expecting something primitive. Instead, they found one of the most beautiful aircraft ever built. The wooden skin had been sanded and polished until it gleamed. The cockpit was roomy with pilot and navigator sitting side by side. The controls responded to the lightest touch. And when they opened the throttles for the first time, they discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about bombers. In level flight at high altitude, the Mosquito could hit 380 miles per hour. With the throttles pushed all the way forward, it could reach 400 miles per hour or more. This was faster than most German fighters could fly at that height. A bomber that could outrun the fighters hunting it. The first combat missions proved the concept was not crazy at all. On May 31, 1942, 4 Mosquitoes attacked the German city of Cologne in broad daylight. They came in at 25,000 feet, dropped their bombs with precision, and turned for home. German air defense scrambled Bf-109 fighters to intercept. The pilots climbed hard, spotted the British bombers heading west, and dove to attack. They built up speed in the dive, closing the distance, fingers on triggers, victory seconds away. Then the Mosquitoes accelerated. The wooden aircraft pulled away, engines screaming, speed climbing past 415 miles per hour. The Bf-109s topped out at 398 miles per hour at that altitude. Despite doing everything right, the German fighters could not catch the wooden bombers. All 4 Mosquitoes returned to England without a scratch. German frustration grew into rage. New tactics, high-altitude ambushes, coordinated wolfpack attacks. Nothing worked. The wooden planes slipped away again and again. But the Luftwaffe remained convinced of one thing: if they could just get close enough to fire, the Mosquito would fall apart. Wood could not possibly survive cannon shells. One good hit, and the RAF would lose their precious wooden wonder. They just needed one chance. In March 1943, Oberleutnant Klaus Fischer thought he had found that chance. His wingman, Lieutenant Werner Hoffmann, flew beside him. Below them, a lone Mosquito was heading home after a bombing run. Fischer smiled inside his oxygen mask, made from furniture scraps probably held together with glue from a carpenter shop. Both pilots banked toward the target. This would be easy. They had no idea that in 60 seconds, everything they believed about wooden aircraft was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. But what Fischer and Hoffmann were about to experience was only the beginning, because the unarmed bomber version of the Mosquito was not the only variant flying over Europe. Deep in British factories, engineers were installing something that would turn the wooden joke into the most terrifying predator in the sky. 4 Hispano 20mm cannons, 4 machine guns, enough firepower to tear a metal fighter apart in a single burst. The hunters were about to become the hunted. In Part 2, we will see what happened when Klaus Fischer opened fire on that wooden aircraft. We will meet Wing Commander Bob Braham, the deadliest Mosquito pilot of the war, who would rack up 29 kills in the wooden fighter. We will witness German bomber crews experiencing terror in the night skies as radar-equipped Mosquitoes hunted them in complete darkness. And we will learn why Adolf Hitler himself demanded a solution to what he called the Mosquito problem. The joke was about to stop being funny. In Part 1, we watched Geoffrey de Havilland convince skeptical military officials to let him build a bomber from wood. We saw furniture makers and piano builders construct an aircraft that everyone called insane. And we witnessed 4 Mosquitoes outrun German fighters over Cologne, returning home without a scratch, while the Luftwaffe watched helplessly. But speed alone does not win wars. The wooden bomber had proven it could escape. What it had not proven was whether it could fight back. Here is a number that changes everything. By mid-1942, German night bombers were killing an average of 127 British civilians every single night. Air raid sirens wailed across London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Families huddled in underground shelters while explosions shook the earth above them. Britain's existing night fighters were too slow to catch the raiders, too blind to find them in the darkness. The RAF needed a killer, something fast enough to hunt German bombers and deadly enough to destroy them. And this is when everything became much more complicated. Air Marshal Arthur Harris sat behind his massive desk at RAF Bomber Command Headquarters, reading the performance reports from the first Mosquito missions. The numbers were impressive. Speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. Successful bombing runs with 0 losses. Aircraft returning without a scratch. But Harris was not impressed. He was furious. Harris had built his entire strategy around massive formations of heavy bombers. Hundreds of Lancasters and Halifaxes flying together, dropping thousands of tons of bombs on German cities. The Mosquito was a gnat compared to these giants. It carried only 4,000 pounds of bombs. A Lancaster carried 22,000 pounds. Simple mathematics. When de Havilland's team proposed converting the Mosquito into a night fighter, Harris dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. We need bombers that can flatten cities, not fancy wooden toys chasing shadows in the dark. The Air Ministry was more receptive, but they had their own concerns. Fighter Command wanted metal aircraft, proven designs, aircraft that could take punishment and keep flying. A wooden fighter seemed like a step backward. What happens when cannon shells hit plywood? The whole thing shatters like a wooden crate dropped from a truck. Squadron leader John Cunningham was one of the few voices pushing back against this thinking. Cunningham was already famous as a night fighter pilot with multiple kills flying the slow and outdated Bristol Beaufighter. He had seen the Mosquito fly. He understood what it could become. In a meeting with Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, Cunningham made his case. The Beaufighter is too slow. German bombers see us coming and dive away before we can get in range. Give me Mosquitoes. Give me that speed. I will show you what a real night fighter can do. Lee Mallory was skeptical. You want to hunt bombers in the dark with a wooden aircraft carrying no armor? If you take a single hit, you are dead. Cunningham smiled. Then I will not take any hits. The debate raged for weeks while German bombs continued falling on British cities. Every night more civilians died. Every night the slow Beaufighters failed to stop the raiders. Production of the fighter variant of the Mosquito had already begun, but Fighter Command refused to accept the wooden aircraft into frontline service. Finally, Cunningham proposed a compromise. 1 squadron, 30 days. Let me prove what the Mosquito can do in actual combat. If I fail, you can scrap the entire program. Lee Mallory agreed, but he added a condition that made Cunningham's blood run cold. If your wooden fighters start falling apart in combat, if crews die because the aircraft cannot survive damage, I will personally ensure you never fly again. Cunningham had his chance. He also had a target painted on his back. The Mosquito night fighter that Cunningham would fly was designated the NF Mark II. It looked similar to the bomber version, but carried weapons that transformed it into an aerial predator. 4 Hispano 20mm cannons were mounted in the belly of the aircraft. These were not small-caliber machine guns. Each cannon fired explosive shells the size of a man's thumb at a rate of 600 rounds per minute. The combined firepower could tear a heavy bomber apart in a single 2-second burst. 4 additional machine guns were mounted in the nose, adding another 4,800 rounds per minute of armor-piercing bullets. When a Mosquito opened fire, it unleashed a storm of destruction that no aircraft could survive. But the most important addition was invisible. British scientists had developed airborne interception radar, a system that could detect enemy aircraft in complete darkness from miles away. A radar operator sat beside the pilot, staring at a glowing screen guiding the aircraft toward targets the pilot could not see. The combination was revolutionary. Speed to catch any bomber. Radar to find them in the blackest night. Firepower to destroy them instantly. The wooden toy had become a wooden killer. On the night of May 28, 1942, Cunningham took off from RAF Ford in his Mosquito NF Mark II. His radar operator Sergeant C.F. Rawnsley hunched over the glowing scope beside him. The mission was simple. Find German bombers. Kill them. The night was perfectly dark. No moon. Heavy clouds blocking the stars. Somewhere above the English Channel, German Dornier bombers were heading toward Britain loaded with explosives meant for sleeping cities. Cunningham climbed to 15,000 feet and waited. Rawnsley stared at his radar screen, watching for the telltale blips that indicated enemy aircraft. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. 30 minutes. Still nothing. Cunningham felt sweat forming under his oxygen mask. If he returned empty-handed, the critics would tear the Mosquito program apart. Harris would get his wish. The wooden fighter would be cancelled. Then Rawnsley spoke. Contact. Bearing 045. Range 3 miles, heading northwest. Cunningham banked hard toward the contact. The Mosquito responded instantly, rolling into the turn with a grace that no Beaufighter could match. He pushed the throttles forward. The twin Merlin engines roared, accelerating the wooden aircraft toward the unseen enemy. 2 miles, 1 mile, half a mile. Cunningham strained his eyes, searching the darkness ahead. There, a darker shape against the dark sky. The silhouette of a twin-engine bomber, a Dornier Do-217. The German crew had no idea death was racing toward them at 350 miles per hour. Their rear gunner was scanning the sky, but the Mosquito was invisible in the darkness. No engine noise reached them over the roar of their own motors. Cunningham closed to 200 yards. He could see the German aircraft clearly now. The distinctive greenhouse nose, the twin engines, the black crosses on the wings. He squeezed the trigger. All 4 20mm cannons erupted simultaneously. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness like orange lightning. The shells struck the Dornier's right engine wing root and fuselage in a devastating 2-second burst. The German bomber exploded. One moment it was flying. The next moment it was a fireball tumbling toward the channel below. Burning debris scattered across the sky. No parachutes emerged. Cunningham watched the wreckage fall, his heart pounding. The Mosquito had claimed its first night fighter kill. But the night was not over. 15 minutes later, Rawnsley called out another contact. Cunningham hunted it down and found a second Dornier, this one carrying incendiary bombs meant for London. Another burst of cannon fire. Another explosion. Another German bomber falling in flames. When Cunningham landed at Ford in the early morning hours, ground crews rushed to examine his aircraft. They expected to find damage, some sign that the wooden construction had been tested. The Mosquito was perfect. Not a scratch, not a bullet hole. The German bombers had never known what hit them. The report reached Lee Mallory before breakfast. 2 confirmed kills in a single night. 0 damage to the aircraft. The wooden fighter had performed exactly as Cunningham promised. Within a week, the Air Ministry authorized full production of the Mosquito night fighter. Within a month, 3 squadrons were operational. Within 6 months, Mosquito night fighters had destroyed over 200 German bombers. The mathematics had changed. The hunters had become the hunted. But convincing fighter command was only half the battle. The Mosquito still needed to prove itself in daylight combat against the most dangerous predators in the sky. German fighter pilots flying the Bf-109 and Fw-190 were the best in the world. They had years of combat experience. They had shot down thousands of Allied aircraft. And they still believed the wooden Mosquito would shatter the moment they got it in their gun sights. In July 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence issued a new assessment based on actual combat reports. The document was classified secret and distributed only to squadron commanders. The content was shocking. British Mosquito aircraft can no longer be considered vulnerable wooden construction. Combat experience demonstrates exceptional structural resilience and sustained speed advantage over all current German fighter types above 25,000 feet. Engagement is recommended only when altitude advantage exceeds 5,000 feet and diving attack can be executed with maximum velocity. German pilots reading this document understood what it meant. The Luftwaffe was admitting defeat. Their fastest fighters could not catch the wooden bomber. Their heaviest cannon could not destroy it. The aircraft they had mocked as a furniture factory joke was now classified as a threat that should be avoided, but the worst was yet to come. The fighter-bomber variant of the Mosquito, designated FB Mark VI, began reaching frontline squadrons in late 1943. This version combined the speed of the bomber with the firepower of the night fighter. 4 20mm cannons in the nose, 4 machine guns, plus 2,000 pounds of bombs, or 8 rockets under the wings. German fighter pilots expecting to ambush a defenseless wooden bomber suddenly found themselves staring at cannon barrels. Wing Commander Bob Braham became the deadliest Mosquito pilot of the war, hunting German aircraft with the patience of a shark and the firepower of a battleship. He would finish the war with 29 confirmed kills, most of them achieved in the wooden fighter that everyone said could not possibly survive combat. The Luftwaffe was losing pilots faster than they could train replacements. Experienced hunters who had dominated the skies for years were dying against an aircraft made of plywood and glue. And then Adolf Hitler demanded answers. Classified German documents from December 1943 reveal that the Führer himself held emergency meetings about what he called the Mosquito problem. These wooden aircraft were photographing secret V-weapon launch sites. They were bombing Berlin during Hitler's radio addresses, forcing him off the air while sirens wailed. They were humiliating the Luftwaffe in front of the German people. Hitler demanded a solution: build faster fighters, develop new weapons, stop the wooden plague at any cost. German engineers scrambled to respond. New high-altitude interceptors went into emergency development. The TA-152 and improved Bf-109 variants were designed specifically to catch the aircraft that regular fighters could not touch. Vast resources were diverted from other projects to solve the Mosquito problem. But resources alone could not overcome physics. The wooden construction that everyone mocked gave the Mosquito an advantage that metal aircraft could never match. Wood was lighter. Lighter meant faster. Faster meant survival. The joke had become a nightmare. At the end of 1943, the Mosquito had proven itself as a bomber night fighter-bomber and reconnaissance aircraft. It had outrun every fighter Germany could put in the sky. It had destroyed hundreds of German aircraft in air-to-air combat. It had survived cannon hits that should have torn it apart. But the greatest test was still coming. In 1944, the Allies would launch the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Operation Overlord, D-Day, the liberation of Europe. German forces knew the invasion was coming. They had built massive fortifications along the French coast. They had positioned elite panzer divisions to crush any landing force. And they had Luftwaffe squadrons waiting to slaughter Allied aircraft over the beaches. The Mosquito would play a critical role in the invasion. Reconnaissance versions would photograph German defenses. Night fighters would protect the invasion fleet. Fighter bombers would strike targets behind enemy lines. But the Germans had been preparing too. New weapons, new tactics, new ways to finally destroy the wooden aircraft that had humiliated them for 2 years. In Part 3, we will witness the Mosquito's most dangerous missions of the war. We will see crews flying at rooftop height through walls of anti-aircraft fire. We will watch the famous Operation Jericho raid, where Mosquitoes bombed a prison to free French resistance fighters scheduled for execution. And we will learn about the one weakness that could turn the wooden wonder into a burning coffin. Wood plus aviation fuel plus incendiary rounds equals fire. Fast, hot, unstoppable fire. The real war was about to begin. Let me remind you where we are. A British aircraft designer convinced skeptical military officials to build a bomber from wood. Furniture makers and piano builders constructed an aircraft that everyone called insane. German pilots laughed at the plywood toy. Then they stopped laughing when they could not catch it. Then they stopped laughing entirely when Mosquito night fighters started hunting them in the darkness with radar and 420mm cannons. By late 1943, the Mosquito had proven itself as bomber night fighter and reconnaissance aircraft. German intelligence had issued secret reports warning pilots to avoid engagement unless they held massive advantages. But here is a number that will make your jaw drop. Between January and December 1943, Mosquito aircraft flew 4,268 sorties into enemy territory. They lost only 97 aircraft. That is a loss rate of 2.3%. Heavy bombers like the Lancaster were losing 2% per mission. The wooden aircraft was more than twice as survivable as its metal counterparts. And now, with D-Day approaching, the Mosquito was about to face its greatest test. This was no longer an experiment. This was total war. In Berlin, German intelligence officers gathered around tables covered with reconnaissance photographs and combat reports. The mood was grim. Generalleutnant Joseph Schmid commanded Luftwaffe intelligence. He had spent months analyzing the Mosquito threat, and the conclusions made him sick. The data showed that German fighter pilots were failing to intercept 78% of Mosquito missions. When they did manage to engage, kill rates were catastrophically low. For every Mosquito shot down, the RAF was destroying 10 German aircraft. Schmid presented his findings to Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe. The report was classified most secret. The British Mosquito represents the most significant threat to Reich air defense since the beginning of the war. Current interception tactics are ineffective. Recommend immediate development of specialized high-altitude fighters and allocation of additional radar resources to night defense. Göring exploded with rage. He threw the report across the room. His face turned red. His voice echoed through the headquarters building. "You are telling me that furniture defeats the greatest air force in the world, wood built by women and old men in piano factories." But rage could not change physics. German engineers scrambled to develop countermeasures. New fighter variants went into emergency production. The TA-152 was designed specifically to reach the altitudes where Mosquitoes operated. Improved radar systems were rushed to night fighter units. None of it was enough. The Mosquito was too fast, too agile, too deadly, and there were more of them every month. Canadian factories alone were producing over 60 Mosquitoes per month. British production added another 100. The wooden plague was multiplying. German night bomber losses increased from 3.4% per mission in early 1943 to 7.8% by year-end. Experienced crews were dying faster than replacements could be trained. Young pilots with barely 100 hours of flight time were being sent against radar-equipped Predators, flown by veterans with thousands of hours of combat experience. The mathematics of death had reversed. The hunters had become the hunted. But the Mosquito was not invincible. The construction that made it so light and fast had one terrible weakness: wood burns, aviation fuel burns. Combined with incendiary ammunition, they created fires that consumed aircraft in seconds. On the night of August 17, 1943, Flight Lieutenant Tommy Broom was flying a night intruder mission over Hamburg. His Mosquito was hunting German aircraft, returning from raids on Britain. The mission was routine: find bombers landing at German airfields, destroy them. Broom never saw the German night fighter that found him first. A burst of cannon fire struck his left wing. Incendiary rounds ignited the fuel tanks. Within 3 seconds, flames were spreading across the wooden structure. Within 10 seconds, the cockpit was filling with smoke. Within 15 seconds, the entire aircraft was engulfed. Broom and his navigator barely escaped. They tumbled out of the burning wreck at 15,000 feet, parachutes deploying just before the Mosquito exploded into fragments of burning wood, raining down on German farmland below. Both men survived, but spent the rest of the war in prison camps. The incident raised serious questions. Critics who had opposed the wooden design from the beginning seized on the loss. Air Marshal Harris, who had never fully accepted the Mosquito, demanded a review. Perhaps the wooden construction is too fragile for sustained combat operations. Perhaps we have been lucky so far. Perhaps the losses will mount as the Germans adapt. For a brief moment, the Mosquito program trembled on the edge of cancellation. But then came February 18, 1944. Operation Jericho. Amiens prison sat in the heart of occupied France. Behind its thick walls, the Gestapo held over 700 prisoners. Many were members of the French resistance captured during sabotage operations against German forces. More than 100 were scheduled for execution within days. The resistance sent desperate messages to London. Save our people. They are heroes. They will die unless you act. RAF planners studied the problem. A conventional bombing raid would kill the prisoners along with the guards. Precision was impossible at normal bombing altitudes. The target was too small, the walls too close to the cell blocks. But there was one aircraft that could attempt the impossible. Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard was chosen to lead the mission. Pickard was already a legend, famous for leading dangerous raids deep into enemy territory. He had survived missions that killed entire squadrons. Now he would lead 19 Mosquitoes on the most precise bombing raid of the entire war. The plan was audacious. Mosquitoes would fly at rooftop height across France. They would approach the prison at just 50 feet above the ground below German radar coverage. They would strike the outer walls with delayed fuse bombs, blowing holes large enough for prisoners to escape. Then, they would hit the guard barracks, creating chaos while the prisoners fled. The margin for error was zero. Drop bombs too early, and they would hit the cell blocks. Drop them too late, and they would miss the walls entirely. Flying at 300 miles per hour, 50 feet above the ground, pilots would have approximately 2 seconds to release their weapons at the precise moment. February 18, 1944, 11 a.m. Pickard leads his formation across the English Channel. The weather is terrible. Snow squalls reduce visibility to less than a mile. Ice forms on wings and windscreens. Several pilots consider turning back. Pickard presses forward. The Mosquitoes cross the French coast at wave-top height. German radar operators never see them. Anti-aircraft batteries along the coast remain silent. The wooden aircraft are invisible. 50 minutes later, Amiens prison appears ahead. Gray walls, guard towers. The courtyard where prisoners exercise, unaware that liberation is seconds away. Pickard gives the signal. The first wave attacks. 3 Mosquitoes dive toward the eastern wall. Bombs release. The pilots pull up hard, barely clearing the prison roof. Behind them, explosions tear through ancient stone. Debris flies. A massive hole opens in the wall. The second wave hits the northern wall. More explosions. More holes. Guards run in confusion, not understanding what is happening. The third wave targets the guard barracks. Bombs slam into the building. Walls collapse. Windows shatter. Inside the prison, chaos erupts. Prisoners hear the explosions. They see daylight through the shattered walls. They run. Over 250 prisoners escape through the breaches. They scatter across the French countryside. Many reach resistance safe houses. Many survive the war. Many return to fighting the Germans within days. The raid lasts less than 4 minutes. But victory comes with a price. German fighters scramble from nearby airfields. Pickard's Mosquito is hit during the withdrawal. His aircraft crashes in a field outside Amiens. Pickard and his navigator are killed instantly. 2 other Mosquitoes are lost to anti-aircraft fire. 6 crew members die. But more than 250 prisoners live because 19 wooden aircraft did what no other bomber in the world could do. News of Operation Jericho spread across occupied Europe within hours. BBC Radio broadcast the story. Underground newspapers printed accounts of the raid. The Mosquito became a symbol of hope to millions living under German occupation. French resistance morale soared. Recruitment increased. Sabotage operations intensified. In London, even the critics fell silent. The impact extended far beyond a single prison. Military planners realized the Mosquito could strike targets that no other aircraft could reach. Factory buildings, bridge supports, Gestapo headquarters, individual structures in the middle of cities destroyed, while surrounding buildings remained untouched. This was precision warfare, surgical strikes, death delivered with surgical accuracy by aircraft made of wood. The statistics told a story that changed military thinking forever. By the end of 1944, Mosquito squadrons had flown 39,795 combat missions. They had dropped 26,867 tons of bombs on enemy targets. They had lost only 254 aircraft to enemy action. The loss rate was 0.64%. Less than 1 aircraft lost for every 150 missions flown. Heavy bomber squadrons lost 5.2% per mission. To deliver the same tonnage of bombs, they lost 8 times as many aircraft and crews. The mathematics were undeniable. The Mosquito was the most efficient bomber ever built. But efficiency was only part of the story. Mosquito night fighters destroyed over 600 German bombers. Mosquito fighter bombers destroyed another 600 German aircraft in air-to-air combat. Reconnaissance Mosquitoes photographed every German fortification before D-Day, providing intelligence that saved thousands of Allied lives during the invasion. German General Adolf Galland, who commanded all Luftwaffe fighter forces, wrote his assessment after the war. The Mosquito was the most successful twin-engine combat aircraft anyone built. Germany had nothing that could match it. We tried. We failed. The British had turned wood into a weapon that defeated steel. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, the man who had initially dismissed the Mosquito as a foolish idea, reversed his position completely. He called it the greatest multi-role combat aircraft of the entire war. The wooden toy had become a wooden legend. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. never stopped pushing boundaries. After the war ended, he turned his attention to the new frontier of jet propulsion. Faster, higher, beyond the limits of propeller aircraft. On September 27, 1946, he climbed into an experimental jet called the DH-108. The aircraft was designed to explore the mysterious realm beyond 600 miles per hour, where air behaved strangely and aircraft sometimes tore themselves apart. The test flight ended in tragedy. The DH-108 broke apart over the Thames estuary. De Havilland was killed instantly. He was 36 years old. The man who proved that wood could defeat metal died pushing the boundaries of speed that his wooden wonder had helped establish. In Part 4, we will explore the lasting legacy of the Mosquito. We will meet the Canadian workers who built over 1,000 of these aircraft in factories across Ontario. We will see how the design principles pioneered by furniture makers influenced jet-age aircraft for decades. We will visit the museums where the last surviving Mosquitoes are preserved. We will hear from German veterans who spoke with respect about the aircraft they once mocked. And we will answer the question that has haunted military historians for 80 years. How did an aircraft built from furniture scraps become the greatest multi-role combat plane of World War II? The answer might surprise you. Let us trace the journey one final time. A British aircraft designer proposed building a bomber from wood when everyone else was racing toward aluminum and steel. Military officials laughed him out of the room 3 times. Furniture makers and piano builders constructed an aircraft that German propaganda called proof of British desperation. Luftwaffe pilots were briefed that a few cannon rounds would shatter the wooden frame, like dropping a chair off a roof. Then reality arrived. The wooden toy flew faster than any German fighter. It survived cannon hits that should have torn it apart. It hunted German bombers in the darkness with radar and 4 20mm cannons. It bombed a French prison at rooftop height, freeing 250 resistance fighters scheduled for execution. It flew 39,795 combat missions and lost only 254 aircraft to enemy action. The aircraft everyone mocked became the greatest multi-role combat plane of World War II. But this story has one final chapter, a twist that nobody expected. Because the man who made it all possible never lived to see his creation's ultimate triumph. And sometimes, success comes with a price that cannot be measured in statistics. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. was not satisfied with victory. Even as Mosquitoes dominated the skies over Europe, his mind raced ahead to the next frontier. Propeller aircraft had reached their limits. The future belonged to jets, to speeds that seemed impossible, to altitudes where the air grew thin and strange things happened to aircraft pushing beyond 600 miles per hour. After the war ended in 1945, de Havilland threw himself into jet development with the same obsessive energy that had created the Mosquito. He designed an experimental aircraft called the DH-108, nicknamed the Swallow. It was built to explore the mysterious region approaching the speed of sound, where aircraft sometimes shook themselves apart and pilots died without warning. On September 27, 1946, de Havilland climbed into the Swallow for a high-speed test flight over the Thames estuary in England. The weather was clear. The aircraft performed perfectly during the initial climb. Then he pushed the throttle forward, accelerating toward speeds no British pilot had ever reached. Something went wrong. At approximately 600 miles per hour, the DH-108 began to disintegrate. The forces tore the experimental jet into pieces. De Havilland had no time to react, no time to eject, no time to send a final radio message. His body was recovered from the wreckage that washed ashore days later, He was 36 years old. The man who proved that wood could defeat metal died pushing the boundaries of speed that his wooden wonder had helped establish. His father, Geoffrey de Havilland Sr., the legendary aircraft designer who had founded the company, received the news at the factory where Mosquitos were still being assembled. Workers described seeing the old man walk slowly through the workshop, running his hand along the wooden fuselage of an unfinished aircraft, tears streaming down his face. The son who had championed the Mosquito against all opposition, who had personally flown the first prototype, who had believed when no one else believed, was gone. But his legacy was just beginning to unfold. Wing Commander Bob Bram, the deadliest Mosquito pilot of the war, with 29 confirmed kills, survived the conflict but carried scars that never healed. He spent years in German prison camps after being shot down in 1944. When liberation finally came, he weighed barely 140 pounds. The confident hunter who had terrorized German bomber crews returned home a broken man who flinched at loud noises and could not sleep through the night. Bram eventually recovered enough to continue flying, serving in the Royal Air Force until 1952. He died in 1974, remembered by his fellow pilots as the greatest night fighter ace Britain ever produced. But those who knew him said he never stopped having nightmares about burning aircraft falling from dark skies. The German pilots who had mocked the wooden toy learned different lessons. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, who encountered Mosquitos multiple times and survived the war with 28 victories, spent decades reflecting on his experiences. In a 1985 interview, 40 years after the fighting ended, he spoke with surprising honesty about the aircraft that had humiliated the Luftwaffe. "We were arrogant about the wooden construction. Wood seemed primitive compared to our modern metal fighters. But combat taught us humility very quickly. That wooden aircraft was better engineered than anything Germany produced." The British understood something we missed. The best material is not always the most advanced. Sometimes the best material is simply the one that works. Stigler died in 2008, one of the last surviving Luftwaffe aces. To the end of his life, he spoke of the Mosquito with respect, bordering on reverence. But the real legacy was not measured in individual fates. The Mosquito's impact on aircraft design lasted for decades after the last propeller stopped spinning. Military planners learned that speed could protect aircraft better than armor. They learned that one fast, agile aircraft could accomplish missions that required dozens of slow, heavy bombers. They learned that unconventional materials and construction methods could produce results that conventional thinking never imagined. These lessons shaped the jet age. Modern military aircraft use carbon fiber fiberglass and advanced composite materials that would have seemed like science fiction in 1940. But the principle is exactly the same as the plywood and balsa sandwich that made the Mosquito so light and strong. Choose materials for their engineering properties, not because they seem modern or impressive. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter used composite construction derived directly from lessons learned building wooden aircraft in World War II. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the most advanced commercial airliner ever built, has a fuselage made primarily from composite materials rather than traditional aluminum. The furniture makers who sanded plywood in British workshops during the war would recognize the philosophy, even if the materials have changed. The numbers tell the ultimate story. Between 1940 and 1945, British and Canadian factories produced 7,781 Mosquitoes. They served in every theater of the war, from the frozen skies over Norway to the tropical heat of Burma. They flew reconnaissance missions that photographed every German fortification before D-Day, providing intelligence that saved countless Allied lives during the invasion of Normandy. Mosquito bombers dropped 26,867 tons of explosives on enemy targets. Mosquito night fighters destroyed over 600 German bombers, protecting British cities from the terror of nocturnal raids. Mosquito fighter bombers destroyed another 600 German aircraft in daylight combat, achieving kill ratios that seemed impossible for a wooden plane. The total impact cannot be calculated precisely, but historians estimate that Mosquito operations shortened the war in Europe by several months, and saved tens of thousands of lives on both sides. All from an aircraft built by furniture makers using techniques their grandfathers would have recognized. What does this story teach us about innovation? The Mosquito succeeded not because it was revolutionary, but because it was appropriate. Jeffrey de Havilland Jr. did not invent new materials or new construction methods. He recognized that existing techniques could solve a problem that everyone else was approaching wrong. Military orthodoxy said bombers needed armor. De Havilland asked why. The answer was to survive enemy fire. But what if you simply never got hit? Speed could accomplish what armor could not. This is the essence of disruptive thinking. Not finding new answers, but asking different questions. The Wright brothers faced similar skepticism. So did the inventors of the tank, the submarine, the aircraft carrier. Every military innovation that changed warfare began with someone being told their idea was insane. In business, Steve Jobs was mocked for believing people would pay premium prices for computers with beautiful design. Elon Musk was ridiculed for thinking electric cars could compete with gasoline vehicles. Jeff Bezos was called crazy for believing people would buy books from a website. The pattern repeats across every field of human endeavor. Experts defend existing solutions. Outsiders see possibilities the experts miss. Progress happens when someone has the courage to be wrong in public. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. In 1978, a group of aviation enthusiasts in New Zealand began an ambitious project. They wanted to build a flying Mosquito from scratch using the original plans and construction techniques from World War II. The project took 20 years. Workers sourced birch plywood from the same Canadian forests that supplied the original factories. They mixed resin glue using formulas unchanged since 1940. They shaped wooden pieces by hand, just as furniture makers had done during the war. In 2012, their Mosquito flew for the first time. The twin Merlin engines roared to life. The wooden aircraft lifted off a New Zealand runway and climbed into the sky, handling exactly as test pilots described 70 years earlier. The pilot who flew that mission said something that captures the entire story perfectly. You can feel the craftsmanship in every control input. This is not just engineering. This is art built by people who loved what they were making. No computer designed this aircraft. Human hands shaped every piece. And somehow that makes it fly better. As of 2024, only 3 Mosquitoes remain airworthy out of nearly 8,000 built. They appear at air shows around the world, where tens of thousands gather to watch the wooden wonder fly one more time. Veterans from both sides, now very old men, stand together and watch remembering aircraft they once flew or once feared. Former enemies shake hands. Former hunters and hunted share stories. The war that divided them is history now. But the Mosquito remains a symbol of something that transcends conflict. Human ingenuity, creative courage, the refusal to accept that impossible means impossible. From a group of furniture makers with an idea everyone called insane, to an aircraft that changed the course of World War II and influenced aviation design for 80 years afterward. Jeffrey de Havilland Jr. proved that the right solution is not always the obvious one. That wood can defeat metal. That speed can defeat armor. That believing in your vision matters more than having the approval of experts. 39,795 combat missions. 26,867 tons of bombs delivered. Over 1,200 enemy aircraft destroyed. Tens of thousands of lives saved on both sides of the war. All built from Canadian birch, South American balsa, and the stubborn refusal to give up on an idea that everyone said was ridiculous. They laughed at the wooden plane. Then they could not catch it. Then they could not destroy it. Then they could not build anything better. By the end, nobody was laughing anymore. They were just remembering. If you know another story of an impossible idea that changed history, share it in the comments below. This is just one of hundreds of innovations from World War II that began with someone being told they were crazy. Subscribe to discover more stories that history almost forgot, because sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that save the world.